Okay, I watched the gay pirate show. Y'all kept asking me a bunch of times, and honestly, I've seen a bunch of YouTube creators be bullied by their audiences into watching Our Flag Means Death, and I am here to say, thank you, good on you, it's a great show. I mean, that was kind of obvious from the start though. At this point, anything with Taika Waititi even tangentially involved in it, I'm all in on. Hell, you could probably even tell me it was Taika Waititi presents American politics, and I'd probably be like, well, yeah, I bet of all the people in the world he could make that enjoyable. Despite my joking though, Taika's involvement was why I actually watched Our Flag Means Death as it was coming out. So I was just as shocked as everyone when I saw that this pirate historical comedy turned out to be super gay. Like, actually, explicitly, uber-de-duper super mega fun time ultra gay. Like, gayer than lesbian night at your local dog-friendly cafe. Now, I am someone who loves to read the gay subtext into everything that I watch, from the day that I realized that Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Tom Hardy in Inception are totally jilted ex-lovers.
You mustn't be afraid to dream a little bigger, darling.
But like most people who watched Our Flag Means Death, while I certainly saw the tension between these fictional depictions of real-life figures Steed, Bonnet, and Blackbeard, I've been so trained as a queer person by years of queer baiting or gay coding in media to figure that it was just that. Tension that would sadly remain unrequited, left to be read in between the lines like the air upon far left unspoken between Kirk and Spock. I honestly figured I'd have to watch scenes like this.
You've got a little bit in your beard. No, come to the down a bit. Just up a little bit to the left. Yeah, I'll get it.
Oh my God, this is happening.
What?
And just resign myself to having to defend my enjoyment of the underpinning romantic tension between these two as somehow devaluing the importance of
close male friendships. Why does everything have to be gay to you?
Because being trained to look for your representation in the subtext of media for decades means that you're somehow taking away from other people's interpretations, because we in our culture constantly need to place depictions of non-normative masculine relationships at conflict with each other instead of asking the real question of why there aren't enough already to go around. So imagine my surprise. Well, you don't have to imagine it because the internet basically did a collective gasp at the same time, when it turned out that the show was actually really gay. Even the showrunner himself seemed pretty shocked by the reaction.
We're just saying casually, yeah, okay, we have queer and non-binary characters. The fact that it's lining up with this national movement means I feel good that people can watch the show and see themselves, and feel like, yes, we are mainstream, we're not being shuttled off to the side. It's not a speciality show, it's for everyone. It makes me so happy that it's been received that way.
How the man who helped to make one of the gayest pirate shows of all time didn't know about the history of queer coding, I will never know, but in some ways, that sweet naivete is what I think made this show resonate with so many people. That the romantic relationship was built up naturally, and that we as an audience got to see it without the predetermined expectation that it would go that way, because the fact that it was an LGBTQ show wasn't blasted from every news outlet before the show even started, trying to garner a queer audience. When these two ended up in a relationship, we just got to go, oh, that makes sense, and just enjoy it like we would a normalized straight story.
It's unfortunate timing in that it's happening at all. And it's great timing in that Florida is saying don't say gay, and HBOMax is saying Our Flag Means Death. That's fantastic, I think. The goal for me was to create a show that didn't feel niche. It had these relationships and these characters, but it's mainstream. I wanted to create a four-quadrant, I hate that phrase, a four-quadrant hit that still has these relationships because, of course, this is life. We aren't saying this is a gay pirate show, this is a pirate show and that's it.
It was a queer romance that got to exist outside the societal expectations of our modern day media, positive or negative, placed upon it. Yet it was also a queer romance set in the 17th century age of piracy, against a backdrop of men feeling the pressures of society that expected them to act out a violent, murderous masculinity, in the case of Blackbeard, or live the life of a pantered, flamboyant, and insulated heterosexual man of high society for Bonnet. It was a show about the expectations of manhood that was placed upon both of these men in different ways, but both still being oppressive, and how they chose a pirate life for them because it represented a chance to remove themselves from those expectations. And then within that, finding a love for each other because they were outside the margins of society. And rightfully, most of the discourse surrounding the show has centered upon these two main characters. Yet there are a ton of characters in the show that I think are also as worthy of discussion in terms of the expectations placed upon them. But today I actually want to talk about one specific character from Our Flag Means Death who has gotten mildly overlooked. Another character who had a unique relationship to the expectations of masculinity and femininity placed upon them, Jim Jimenez. Jim Jimenez, played by non-binary actor Vito Ortiz, is themselves also non-binary in the series as well. And their representation in the show, like the series' leading gay romance, places them in an interesting fulcrum within our discussions of the series. Firstly, considering the series' intense historical accuracy dispels the stigma and misconception today that trans people are somehow a new phenomenon or just a fad of the 21st century. Yet while the show is set in the 17th century, Jim also speaks to a need that we have in the 21st century today. A desire for trans people to see ourselves in our totality, both accepted and acknowledged, and getting to thrive and be our best selves. Yet not dismissing or ignoring the harm that societal expectations for our gender have caused us. Yet through Jim, the show manages to do something that rarely happens for trans characters. It walks the line between past and present, thriving and struggling, and trying to be our best self, and yet realizing we are just ourselves, as well as refute the expectations of the gender boxes that we constantly try to place people in, instead shoving them in a box and kicking them out into the sea. So, before we get scurvy on the high seas, oh, that was a bad joke to start this off with. Anyways, screw it, we're gonna go with it. I just want to take a few minutes to talk to you about this video sponsor, and one that I'm honestly really excited to have. So that's why I'm honored to be working with Tab for a Cause. Tab for a Cause is a browser extension that donates to a charity each time you open up a new tab without costing you a single thing. Like legit, it costs you nothing and they donate money every single time you open up a new tab on your computer. And if you're anything like me, and let's just face it, you probably are because you're all giant dorks, your computer's probably a mess with tabs right now as you desperately try to search for more information on gay pirates. Or more realistically, you're probably just watching a bunch of Our Flag Means Death music video fan edits. Or you know, whatever normal people do. But if you're doing that, you might as well be doing it for a cause and put those tabs to good use. One cause that Tab for a Cause supports, by the way, that is probably near and dear to a lot of our hearts right now, is supporting reproductive health care. So one simple way that you can work to help protect access to abortion and other critical health services is by downloading Tab for a Cause. And Tab for a Cause is quick and easy to get started. All you have to do is download the extension, then just open as many tabs as you want to your heart's content. And on top of that too, they have a brand new page that is faster, beautiful, and even more charitable. In fact, just by browsing the web, Tabbers, which is the name that they call people who use the extension, by the way, which I think is absolutely adorable, have helped to raise over $1.4 million for charity, which is amazing. So like, why not? So check out the link below so you can download the extension. But with that said, thank you so much to Tab for a Cause, and let's get back to the high seas. And make sure you have vitamin C, that's also very important. When we first meet Jim in the show, they appear to just be a mute man serving aboard Steve Bonnet's ship, an outcast even among the outcasts aboard the Gentleman Pirate's crew, which itself is an outcast ship from even the pirate community due to Bonnet's more flamboyant ways.
No offense, I know you're mates.
Oh, no, none taken. It's true. Besides, Jim's not too keen on politics anyway, so...
Yet we soon learn that Jim is actually a woman on the lam, taking a male guise in order to protect themselves from revenge by Spanish Jackie, whose favorite husband of 20 they killed in revenge for murdering their father. The reason Jim remains mute and wears a fake beard and nose is to hide their identity, lest they be revealed as a woman in disguise.
Oye, te traen comida.
We're starving. Not only did this hide who they were from potential enemies such as Spanish Jackie, but considering many women at the time were considered bad luck on sailing ships, the disguise probably helped them to stay on the ship as well. But like how Steve Bonnet and Blackbeard's depiction in the show reflects the two real-life figures' actual lives, Jim was also inspired by real-life people. While Jim Jimenez was not a real person, according to one of Our Flag Means Death's showrunners, they were based on historical figures, notably Mary Read and Anne Bonny. Mary Read was an Englishwoman who was dressed up as a boy at a young age by her mother in order to make Mary pretend to be her dead half-brother so her mother could continue to get payments from her in-laws, as well as hide that Mary was born out of wedlock. Crafty lady, crafty lady. But even into adulthood, Mary continued to wear this male guise, eventually joining the British military where she fell in love with an English footman. But since she couldn't reveal to him that she was a man, she instead volunteered for extra battles in order to fight alongside him, and garnered herself a reputation as a brave, battle-crazed soldier. Eventually though, she revealed her love to the man and they married. God, can we get that? However, her husband died several years later, so she gone back up her male disguise and turned to the seas, eventually being captured by pirates and made part of their crew, where she continued to keep up her male persona. Eventually, she continued her own career as a pirate herself, joining Johnny Calico Jack Rackman's pirate crew. And it was here that Mary met Anne Bonny, another woman who was in male disguise, who had been disowned by her father after falling in love and marrying a pirate named James Bonny. Now, there's no exact historical proof of this necessarily, but there are stories that Anne's father's plantation went up in flames very soon after he disowned Anne. So what I'm saying is, don't mess with Anne. But after her husband failed to let her join his pirate life, Anne joined Rackham's crew, and also, like Mary, pretended to be a man. And Anne and Mary soon revealed their secrets to each other and became fast friends, and were by all records top crewmen and took part in numerous battles with their fellow pirates. Eventually though, after Rackham became jealous of their friendship, they revealed their secrets to him as well, until one day they were captured by famous pirate hunter John Barrett, with Anne and Mary supposedly being the only major resistance that Barrett faced when he attacked the crew, who were recently drunk from celebrating a recent plunder. Anne even famously said during their trial that Captain Rackham was a coward during their capture, stating, "If he had fought like a man, he need not have been hanged like a dog." Whew! Some strong words there, dang! Eventually though, after their convictions, both women claimed pregnancy and got stays of execution and lived out the rest of their lives, with Reed dying from fever in 1721 and Anne living all the way until 1782, dying in South Carolina. South Carolina? What's in South Carolina? Who would go to South Carolina? But Anne and Mary's stories represent an interesting point when we place them in context of our modern day discussion on trans issues when we compare them to Jim in Our Flag Means Death. Both Anne and Mary don't neatly fit into what we describe as a transgender or even non-binary experience today. But Jim though, despite being inspired by Anne and Mary's lives in Our Flag Means Death, very explicitly fits into how we think about non-binary representation in our media today. When Jim is outed by Spanish sailors sent by Spanish Jackie to their fellow crew members, Jim's fellow crew members eventually start referring to Jim by they-them pronouns.
But Jim's the kind of person where if they stabbed me, I'd be like, yeah, probably deserved it.
And this is something that shocked even actor Vito Ortiz. It was like, we'll use Jim and probably either use she, her, or he, him. But they were like, no, we're going to use they, them. And I said, really? Okay, that's great. This is incredible. Wow, fantastic. Yes, let's do it. You see, these pirates were illiterate men living back in the 17th century. They-them pronouns were probably not really common usage back in pirate days. I doubt that Mary and Anne, after they revealed themselves to Rackham, were using they-them pronouns all around. Nor do I bet that they would have cared much if someone did. Honestly, they probably would have stabbed you before you got around to saying they-them pronouns. So the use of they-them pronouns in Our Flag Means Death, a show that prides itself on historical accuracy, is actually kind of an anachronism. But that historical inaccuracy is part of the point of the intentionality behind the show. You see, this anachronism is connecting Jim's experience, using the language that we have today to depict them as explicitly non-binary. It's making Jim's non-binary status unmissable and clear within the show's text. And this continues throughout the show. Throughout the story, we see Jim coming to terms with not wishing to be seen as a girl, but demanding acceptance as being seen as Jim from their fellow crew members. And actually, I reached out to one of my friends, the wonderful, fantastic Mr. Fox, whose channel you should all go check out, to talk about the importance of that scene to trans masc folks and the emotional burden it places onto Jim in a modern context.
Hi there. I'm a trans man, bisexual disaster, and neurodivergent Bahamian whose niche interest in childhood was pirates. So this show hit me in my entire identity. Jim came as a particularly pleasant surprise to me as a transmasculine person. Not just for their inclusion in the show, but how wonderfully it was handled. From the beginning, we see Jim as the most hardened member of the Revenge. While the rest of Steed's crew display some levels of softness and vulnerability, Jim remains a guarded mystery. His defining feature is basically that you just don't want to mess with him. This stood out to me as someone who's trans masc, because it can be easy for many of us to fall into patterns of toxic masculinity as we work to establish ourselves within the masculine framework. This is especially true for transmasculine people in cutthroat environments. Pun intended. That is, expressions of vulnerability pose a greater threat to Jim's standing than they would to others. Or so they would believe. At one point, we even see Jim describe their circumstances as a prison of their own making.
Estoy atrapado en este disfraz. En una prisión de mi propia creación.
Now, this is a reference to their fugitive status, but I think that there's a lot of trans subtext that we can unpack here. As a trans man, I have experienced erosion of my masculinity by certain people after being outed. One minute everyone's treating me as me, and then boom. They find out I was assigned female at birth and suddenly no longer know how to refer to me. The othering begins, the uncomfortable questions start rolling in, and suddenly my masculinity, previously taken for granted, is put under a microscope. It's an experience that puts you on the defensive around your very self, which leaves you very little room to connect with that person. And I think we see this exemplified when Jim is confronted by the crew following their accidental outing.
All I know is women are bad luck on ships.
Yeah.
Historically.
That's a myth.
Well, no, actually, science. Because women have crystals in their body, and the crystals attract demons, and the demons attract misfortune. You know, the French call it jug. Hey.
Bendito. Look, everyone. I'm gonna keep this very simple. You all know me as Jim. See?
Yeah, good old Jim.
So just keep calling me Jim. Nothing's changed. Except I don't have the beard. My nose is different. And I can speak now. Yes. Anyone got a problem with that?
Certainly not.
It makes sense. Always liked Jim.
Yeah, good girl, you know.
Yeah.
Now, with the way the scene plays out, the quick acceptance was due at least in part to Jim's threatening nature, something that they were taught in childhood and carried on for survival's sake since then. But I think there's way more going on here. As outcasts themselves, the crew is in a great position to just accept Jim's truth. Sure, there were questions, but when it was made clear that Jim did not want to elaborate, there was no pushback. And while they were surprised, at no point did anyone express feelings of betrayal or accuse Jim of dishonesty, nor did they perceive Jim as any less masculine. I love this, because underneath the comedy we get a brilliant example of how to respond to somebody revealing the fact that they're trans. Nothing has changed about that person. You just know them a little bit better than you did before. This initial step of letting the rest of the crew in is the first time we see Jim being vulnerable. From here, their story takes a turn, a little reluctantly, from one of hiding and performative masculinity to a sincere exploration of who they really are. Not who they were trained to be or a role that they were forced to perform, but just Jim. I know I speak for many others when I say I can't wait to see where this journey goes in Season 2. But that's it for me for now. Thank you for listening, and thank you so much to Jesse for bringing me on to Nerd Out.
Thank you, Finn. He is literally the best, and y'all better go subscribe to him or I'll be coming for your booty. And you can take that any way that you want as long as you subscribe to Finn. But as Finn pointed out, this scene is not something that would have necessarily happened at the time during the 17th century. But within the show, it places Jim within a very modern depiction of non-binary people, in a scene that resonates with non-binary people today, not necessarily the 17th century. So, the connection between Jim's explicit modern non-binariness to the historical appearance of Anne and Mary is an important connection to make. The reason that it's important is that there is a current modern day stigma that trans people are just a social fad, something made up today by leftist communists trying to groom the children and indoctrinate them into socialism. And people who believe or argue for that stigma ignore stories like Anne and Mary's because they'll just say that, actually, they were just women who put on the guise of manhood. I mean, they had husbands and only pretended to be men to get on ships and earn the respect of their fellow crew members. And yes, all of that is true, and I wouldn't necessarily say that Anne and Mary would have identified as transgender. But what people arguing this forget to note is that transness is actually an ever-evolving place within society. Because transness is not really a static thing that has existed throughout time immemorial, but is a reaction to expectations placed upon people at birth, whatever society they're in. You see, how people view gender changes all the time in every society and every era. Many gender norms that we see in today's Western society, for example, come out of this shift to trade-based capitalism that began in the 17th century, which divided things like brewing or weaving, which had until then been seen as women's work, into men's work. On top of that, our gender norms today are also interwoven with the history of colonialism, with many Europeans of the 16th and 17th centuries imposing gender and family life on the people that they colonized, often in opposition to white European women. Female slaves and women of color were seen as required to be doing heavy labor, and so they were placed in opposition to white women who were then framed as fragile and delicate. So we see different gender norms for different sexes and different races being developed during colonialization in order to justify people's place in a hierarchy. Even further, our gender norms changed more in our industrial age today, beginning in the 19th century, where women were forced to do more work at home, and society began to value men's labor as worth more money, thus beginning to pay more money to men, creating a class distinction as well. So we see how societal expectations placed upon sex, class, and race all influence how gender is seen within individual societies. And by the way, if you want to learn more about all that, I'd recommend this amazing video by Lily Alexander that dives into all of that in more detail. But the point goes that the gender expectations that were placed upon Anne and Mary were not the same exact ones placed upon people assigned female at birth today. Nor was the society that they lived in built upon the same predictions of gender, femininity, or womanhood that we see today. So while Anne and Mary did not identify as men necessarily, nor would they describe themselves as transgender or as men, they were transgressive across the gender norms expected of them in the society that they were in. Words like transgender and non-binary, nor the specific ways we think about gender today and gender expression, did not exist at the time that they lived in. And so if we look at transgender not as specifically a marginalized political group that we are today, but instead for this conversation think about transness as a willingness to move outside the expectations of your gender at birth, we see a greater connection between Anne and Mary and what we would see as a non-binary experience today, someone who doesn't align with a necessarily binarized view of gender. Thus, the anarchistic treatment of Jim as non-binary within Our Flag Means Death may not be historically accurate in terms of how it showcases itself, but the emotional and political experience it shows is very much the same between Anne and Mary's experience then and non-binary people today, just translated through the story through several years of societal shifts and differences. As a result, what Our Flag Means Death is doing is forcing people to reconcile that trans and non-binary people have always existed throughout history. You can find evidence of us in every society, from Norse mythology characters like Loki reflecting gender non-conforming people that lived in the actual Nordic cultures as I discussed in this video, or in China with their own women pirates subverting gender expectations as well. While we weren't always thought of as transgender or non-binary, nor were the gender expectations placed upon us always the same, nor the marginalization that we face today the same thing that other people faced as well with their own transgressing of gender expectations, what the show is saying is that you can't tell us that we're just a fad, but that we haven't always been here in the same way that we exist today. Because what we really are people who feel like we don't fit into what society tells us to be. But societies always change what they tell people to be, so different people who will find that they are pushed out in different ways in different cultures and time periods. For example, many indigenous cultures in the United States didn't necessarily have more rigidly defined gender roles. Before the advent of Europeans, many indigenous cultures embraced gender fluidity. There was no gender binaries, there were men and women, and then there were feminine men and manly women and transgendered individuals. In Native North American societies, these individuals were considered to normal. There were no defined rules, no distinct binaries. In these societies, men and women frequently assumed opposite gender identities, occasionally cross-dressing, but almost always adopting the universal occupational roles assigned to each sex. Transness is not always the same everywhere, nor is it confined the same way everywhere. But we do always exist. And this need to tell a story for today using the lens of the past is continued in Jim's representation. Throughout the season, Jim is able to explore themselves outside of needing to be a specifically man or woman. Living a pirate life, which is a life about people who feel they don't fit in anywhere, allowed Jim to exist out of what they were expected to be, especially as a person of color. Vito Ortiz again reflected on this in an interview.
When I first read the character description and the pilot, I was like, oh wow, this deeply resonates in so many ways. And I love the fact that I was able to be given the chance to explore Jim with such an understanding of like what it is to ask yourself who you are outside of what society expects from you. So when I was portraying Jim, I made sure that like they are who they are, whether they're looking a certain way or not. They're not acting like a man, they're not acting like a woman, they just are. And I explored what it is to be feminine and masculine in my own terms, outside of what those societal expectations look like. So that was a lot of fun. Also being Latina, Spanish being my first language, when I first read the script, there was a little bit of Spanish in there, but it was mostly English. So when I talked to David and he was like, yeah, you can add a lot more Spanish, go for it, have like fun. It was beautiful because I was able to, in my improvs, I was able to add my Spanish in there because as someone whose first language is Spanish, I normally think in Spanish and I react, and my first instinct is to say something in my language and then the rest English. So I was able to add that to Jim's world, and that was really, really dope.
Further, we also see something unique within the non-binary representation in this show. While Jim struggles internally with their identity, navigating the complexity of what it means for them on the interior, the world around Jim never stigmatizes them for their gender presentation. Their fellow crew members instantly accept them. Hell, even their parental figure, who we meet halfway through the season, instantly accepts Jim for who they are once they learn what Jim's name is.
Please don't get her started.
This child was not raised to kneel or to turn the other cheek. I taught them how to be silent.
All of this stands in sharp contrast to how we see many trans characters in our fiction today. There's almost always some version of trauma that stems from someone being a trans or non-binary person in most stories that we see today. So as a result, it's so refreshing to see a trans character like Jim eschew that, allowing people within the story, as well as us, the audience, to see who they are and accept them on their own terms. It's not that gender expectations don't exist, nor that Jim isn't finding difficulty in figuring out how they fit within this world and their own understanding of their own gender, but that journey is allowed to proceed without it having to be defined by trauma. This type of story, especially for a non-binary person of color, even more especially for one in historical fiction, is so incredibly unique. Further, Jim develops a growing, possibly romantic relationship with the ship's cook, Olun, and their relationship also begins to defy expected gender roles between them. Neither one of them is being the man or the woman in the relationship, they just are. And it's a relationship I hope to see more of in Season 2. Dear God, HBOMax announces Season 2! All of this type of representation is so incredibly meaningful to non-binary, especially trans masc non-binary people today. Not only does it allow us to see that we have always existed, that we are full people with a rich history, but also allows us to see joy and find joy in ourselves today and understand ourselves today. And it gives non-binary and trans masc people today a hope for themselves. While trans and non-binary representation is becoming more and more common in our fiction today, masc, trans, and non-binary representation still falls behind their femme counterparts. So Jim's representation in this popular piece of media allows trans masc folks to feel a sense of pride in themselves and their bodies, and it can be incredibly life-changing. We see this with the actor themselves, with Vito Ortiz speaking about how fan art of people depicting the show's Surgeon Roach giving the character of Jim top surgery inspired them to pursue their own top surgery in real life, to feel comfortable in their own body. I've been thinking of whether or not to do it, or have them smaller, and I was like, how is that going to look on our flag? For a while I was like, maybe I'll just wait if we get more seasons. I would just wait until that's done and then do it. But then seeing all this fan art, people totally going with Roach being the top surgeon, I was like, I could totally do this. I guess I'll thank you, Internet, for giving me this beautiful gift of just, I can get that surgery and show my scars and people will know it's Roach who performed the surgery. That's why, while we celebrate all of Our Flag Means Death historical accuracies, it's important to know where the show changes the historical accuracy, because those changes are about reflecting on what the story can say for today's society, not about how it's making a documentary about yesterday's. It's a story that makes you understand the past through the lens of today, and ultimately forces you to realize that you're looking in a mirror and seeing yourself for the first time. Alrighty everybody, I hope you enjoyed this video. I wanted to talk about Our Flag Means Death for a long time, but I saw so many of my fellow YouTubers like Rowan Ellis and James Somerton release their own videos, and for a while I kind of wondered what I wanted to say about the show. But having rewatched it, I really honed in on how important Jim was, and how much I didn't really think about how important this character was within this historical context. And so I just wanted to kind of rant about it for a little bit, and I hope you really enjoyed this video of me getting to discuss them. Please don't forget forget to subscribe to my channel for more discussions of videos like this. I have some really exciting videos coming up, but more importantly, please go and subscribe to Fantastic Mr. Fox's channel. He is absolutely amazing, and I adore him with all of my heart, so please check him out, and thank you to him for contributing to this video. I also wish to say a thank you to my patrons for allowing me to do videos like this and being a weird dork and find costumes. It was a lot of fun, and I really appreciate you supporting me and all that fun stuff. And if you want to support me doing what I do, please consider going over to my Patreon and get your name in videos and things like that, as well as some sneak peeks at some videos that I have coming up that I'm kind of really excited about, so be on the look for that, because some stuff I got coming out over the next month and a half is really honestly exciting. But beyond all of that, like I said, don't forget to subscribe. I also have a secondary channel called Jesse Gender After Dark where I do news, reviews, and reactions. That link is below, so you can subscribe there. I also have a podcast called Jumpgate that I do with the wonderful Vera Weil of the Council of Geeks channel where we rewatch the episodes of Babylon 5. But beyond all of that, I just thank you so much for being here, and I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Here we go. I know I've used this song once before, but I like it so much, so here's some more. I just want to say to my Patreons, I love you so much, and here's this song to say thank you. If it's the beat. Alex Miller, Alicia Strice, Ali Gober, Annie with an I, Ish Indra, Ashley Allenbo, Kiki Yo, Barbaruski, Beatrix Pruvis, Bella Lugosi, Blue, Blueberry Hill, Boyd and Mary Bethero, Casual Observer, Catherine Lambeth, Celestial Dawn, Chloe Dollar, Chris Boodley, Crit Facts, Cyber Quaker, D. Ray, Dominic Noble, Drew Batch, Lygia Tativi, Elizabeth Christensen, Elijah M. Ish the Mad, Farangato, Felicia Toast, Flynn, G-Man 42, Hacker Men, Here Reeses, Holly Walters, James Hodge, James Krivda, Jason Nutt, Jedi Indiana Jones, Jemshin, Jennifer Fuss, Jenny Mabel, Jessica Wright, Joe Herman Hold, John Witherby, Joseph Dewey, Julie Mason, Justine, Kay Liss, Kara Erin Foss, Kevin Frotag, Laura Demerol, Leoetha Boyd, Lily Gray, Luna T, Lysa, Maeve, Maggie the Goblin, Matt Chung, Meadow Whisperer, Melinda Walters, Melody Ann Winters Good, Mary Mello, Michael Godey, Miranda Janelle, Maureen the Pirate Queen, Nathan Steele, Nathil Fraughton, Nikki Gordon Bloomfield, Odd Just Odd, Peter Landers, Pissed and Twisted Garage, Randy Thompson, Sarah Bystam, Sarah Lemero, Sarah Leslie Hutchkins, Sasha M, Sean Piper, Shield Maiden 44444, Sky Skinner, Sonia Naroperdo, Spooky Heather Sylvia, Steven Richardson, Steven Clenard, Strawberry Pup Tart, Super Desi, Still Restaurato, Tiffany Danger, Transit Toronto, Troy Stull, Ulysses the Pagan, Verdux Kai, Vincent Ellington, W. Randy, E.D., Wellington Marcus, Wendy's Abizzle, William Stewart, Zoe Kerr, Zone 1 Librarian. Thank you so much to all of you, my patrons, and one final note to wrap up on. I did recently learn that sadly one member of my patron community sadly passed away recently. So for one final time, I just wish to say thank you so much to Eva Kniva for all that you gave me and all the support that you gave me. It meant the world to me, and I send you, and especially your family right now, some love.